on the one hand, we enjoy the choices that we have, and if given a choice about whether we want to retain or forgo having as many choices, we might want to retain those choices for the most part. I think having a lot of choices is something that just feels good to have, as opposed to not having enough. But on the other hand, there is that possibility of becoming overwhelmed and anxious, and maybe even it might even debilitate our ability to make a rational or beneficial decision. How do we go about addressing this? Is this something that we even need to address, or is it something that kind of balances out on its own and we just have to be cognizant of it? Or maybe it's just an intellectual exercise more than a practical one when we're considering it. Maybe there isn't really anything we can do about it, because I don't think anybody is really going to forego their choices because of any prospective anxiety that they might feel about them.
I see what you're saying. It does feel good to have choices, and it's true that people generally prefer having more options than fewer. But when we recognize that these choices can lead to anxiety or decision paralysis, it becomes a balancing act. To address your point about whether it's more of an intellectual exercise or something we need to actively manage, I think it depends on the individual. For some, simply being aware of the paradox can help. Just knowing that too many choices can cause stress might make them more mindful of their decision-making process. On the other hand, for those who find it significantly impacting their well-being or productivity, there are practical steps to take. For instance, setting personal guidelines for decision-making can simplify the process, like having a few go-to restaurants to choose from instead of pondering over dozens. In bigger decisions, breaking them down into smaller, manageable steps can help. Instead of focusing on the overwhelming number of choices, concentrate on what aligns best with your values and long-term goals. What are your thoughts on creating personal guidelines for decision-making? Do you think that could be helpful, or does it feel too restrictive?
It does not feel restrictive, and to that point, I wonder if the more choices we have had at our disposal, the better we've gotten at making decisions. I wonder if there's any way to actually measure that improvement, that possible improvement in making choices. A lot of these guidelines are things that I think could naturally come along for the ride as we gain more and more options in whatever domain it is. When it comes to movies, for example, I can easily see how so many streaming services have, included these ways of showing people what they would most likely be interested in, and gotten better at that. They've narrowed the selection down, even though people have that option of overriding these recommendations. We still tend to go with those recommendations because of that, because of that knowledge we have about what interests us, or what these machines, these, what do we call them? These, what is the word that I'm looking for?
That's a great observation. The idea that having more choices might improve our decision-making skills over time is interesting. It suggests that with experience, we can develop better strategies to manage the abundance of options. Regarding your point about streaming services, they use algorithms to recommend content based on our viewing habits. These algorithms are a form of artificial intelligence, AI, and they've indeed become quite adept at predicting what we might enjoy. This helps narrow down the overwhelming number of choices and makes decision-making easier. So it seems that as we get used to having more options, we also get better tools and strategies to handle them. Personal guidelines, recommendations from AI, and our growing understanding of our preferences all contribute to more efficient decision-making. Do you think there are other areas of life where we've naturally developed better decision-making skills due to an increase in choices? For example, has your experience in any particular domain helped you make quicker, more confident decisions?
I keep coming back to the idea that there is a net neutral, outcome with that paradox between having these options and the choice paralysis that comes with having these options. Amongst all the things that we've said, I think we can also add to that the experience we get from trying things that we might change our mind about. You mentioned this as a sort of negative of having too many choices, where we might feel regret or FOMO, which are two different sides of that spectrum as far as I can tell. But I think there's also a positive in there, which is that we get to try a whole range of things that we might never have had the opportunity to be exposed to otherwise. And this can also give us a better idea of what we're looking for. It can give us a better understanding of ourselves in relation to whatever it is that we have those choices about. So I forget the question that you asked initially, but yeah, what do you think about what I just said?
I think you've hit on an important point. While the paradox of choice can indeed lead to decision paralysis and FOMO, it also presents opportunities for personal growth and self-discovery. Having a variety of options allows us to experiment and learn more about our preferences, strengths, and values. This trial and error approach can be incredibly valuable. Trying out different things, even if we sometimes regret our choices, helps us refine our decision-making process. It builds a more nuanced understanding of what we truly enjoy or need, making future decisions easier and more informed. So, it seems that while there are challenges with having many choices, the experience we gain from navigating these options can lead to a net positive outcome. The key might be to embrace the process, understanding that occasional regret or second guessing is a natural part of learning and growth. Would you say that this balance between choice and paralysis is something you've experienced in your personal life? And do you think it has ultimately helped you become more decisive or self-aware?
Yeah, I completely agree that I think it's something that we should not necessarily try to get rid of. We should appreciate the choices that we have while trying to figure out better ways to determine which one of these choices are better suited for whatever it is that we're looking for. And to your question about whether I've experienced any things in my life that have provoked or elicited choice paralysis, there has been many, actually. I've found that I've been very attracted to a lot of interest over the course of my life, and sometimes I've had to let go of some because of injuries. I think less or fewer times I've had to let go of them just out of disinterest. But I think there's hardly been any phase of my life where I haven't had too many things that I've wanted to get really good at. And this is what makes them feel like a choice paralysis. It's not so much that I am not able to do all of these things. It's more that I don't have the time or the bandwidth to focus on any one of them as much as I want to, considering how good I want to get at it. If I didn't want to get as good as I tend to with any of these, different hobbies or interests, the choice paralysis might not feel like it anymore. So I'm not sure if this is something other than choice paralysis that I'm describing, but it tends to feel the same way, where I recognize that had I only had one interest, I would not have had this problem where I'm trying to prioritize or even thinking about which one to prioritize. I would be able to do what feels natural to me, which is to focus wholeheartedly on whatever that is, as opposed to feeling spread thin and feeling as though I'm not progressing in any given area as fast and meaningfully as I would like to.
It sounds like you're describing a situation many people can relate to. Having a wide range of interests and passions, but limited time and resources to pursue them all to the extent you'd like. This certainly aligns with the concept of choice paralysis, but it's also a deeper reflection on how we allocate our time and energy. Balancing multiple interests can indeed be challenging, especially when you have a strong desire to excel in each area. One strategy might be to periodically reassess your priorities and focus on a few key areas at a time. This doesn't mean abandoning other interests, but rather rotating your focus to give each one the attention it deserves over time. Another approach could be to set specific time-bound goals for each interest. By breaking down your pursuits into smaller, manageable projects, you might feel a greater sense of accomplishment and progress without feeling overwhelmed by the sheer number of options. It's also worth acknowledging that interests can ebb and flow. It's natural for passions to shift over time, and sometimes letting go of an interest, even temporarily, can create space for deeper engagement with others. Have you found any particular strategies that help you manage multiple interests, or is this something you're still exploring?
It very much is something that I'm still exploring. Your advice seems to target more how to go about time management, which I'm not sure is actually the issue, although that's part of the issue at least. But I think the deeper issue is simply wondering whether I could have progressed so much more in one focus as opposed to having so many different interests. It's not so much that I don't think I can make enough time or allocate enough time for them during the day. It's more that I'm constantly regretting not being better at one or, one hobby or one interest or the other, because I'm always considering what if I hadn't put those hours into something else, even though that other thing is something that I might be interested in also, but just not as much. So I guess it comes down to really figuring out which one is a priority, which is not as easy as it sounds. A lot of these hobbies seem to have at least three favorite or three top hobbies that are just really hard to rank order in terms of priority. And I guess for the most part, to answer your question about how I go about navigating that, I think I just tend to leave it up to my whim. I tend to leave it up to my mood in terms of when to focus and how much time even to focus on these hobbies. More and more, I have been doing the allocation of time where it's, I guess, the top three hobbies that I have so far, which are dancing, this YouTube content creation, and calisthenics, or basically working out. I think I have done what you're suggesting, which is to at least allocate some part of my day to these hobbies, but everything else I seem to just attend to whenever the urge arises, more than in any ritualistic or routine basis.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like the heart of the issue is not just time management, but also dealing with the underlying regret and what if scenarios regarding focusing on one passion over another. This can be a tricky balance to strike, especially when you have multiple interests that bring you joy and fulfillment. Your approach of following your whim and mood can be quite healthy, as it allows you to stay engaged and passionate about your activities without feeling overly constrained. However, the feeling of regret for not excelling in one particular area is something many people grapple with. One potential strategy to explore could be to set periodic reflections where you evaluate your progress and satisfaction with each interest. For instance, every few months, you could take some time to reflect on what you've enjoyed, what you feel has been lacking, and whether you want to adjust your focus. This can help you stay connected with your priorities and make more intentional choices without feeling locked into a rigid structure. Additionally, embracing the concept of seasons in life can be helpful. Recognize that it's okay for different interests to take precedence at different times. There might be a season where you focus more on YouTube content creation and another where calisthenics or dancing takes the forefront. This way, you honor your multifaceted interests without the constant pressure of having to excel equally in all at once. How do you feel about this approach of periodic reflection and embracing seasons of focus?
It sounds like great advice. I also think it's something that just happens naturally. I tend to go from focusing a lot on one interest more than others during different phases of a year or just my life in general. But I do think that there is a point to be made about how, regardless of how much I try to allocate my time or put them in a seasonal, arrange them seasonally as you're describing, I think regardless of how I do that, I think that there's always a possibility of regret or feeling that regret. I think that is such an underlying symptom of just having all of these hobbies as opposed to one that I'm not sure can really be resolved in any way. Sure, there are better and worse ways to go about it, and you're alluding to some of the better ones, but I think at the end of the day, and to that broader point about choice paralysis and how we can go about navigating that, I think we just have to come to terms with feeling regret. We have to acknowledge that regret is part and parcel of the many choices we have. It comes with the territory. And so unless we're willing to forego these interests, we just have to live with it, as difficult as that is for me personally, knowing that I could really, really excel in one given area. If only I were to cut the others out and to focus on it completely. I also know that it's something that I don't want to do. It's very, again, double-edged sword in nature. And I think that I just have to come to terms with it. I don't think there's really any way for me to alleviate regret from this equation. Even if I forego some of my other hobbies, I will also regret that. So there's really no outcome that does not include regret in there.
You've articulated a profound insight about the nature of regret and choices. It's true that having multiple interests and passions inherently comes with the potential for regret, as it's nearly impossible to explore every path to its fullest extent simultaneously. Acknowledging and accepting this as part of the journey can be liberating in its own way. Embracing regret as a natural consequence of a rich, varied life can shift the focus from what might have been to appreciating what is. Each interest, even if not pursued to its maximum potential, adds value and richness to your life. It's about finding peace with the choices you make and recognizing that every path has its own rewards and trade-offs. Instead of aiming to eliminate regret, the goal could be to make peace with it, seeing it as a sign that you are living a life full of diverse experiences and passions. This mindset can transform regret from a negative force into a testament to a life well lived, full of exploration and discovery. How do you feel about this perspective? Do you think it might help you find more contentment with your choices and the inherent regrets that come with them?
Very much so. And as you were saying that, I do want to wrap up on this last note, by the way. I think that it's very analogous with investing. Investing is something that we're always encouraged to diversify while doing, because if you invest in one stock and it doesn't do well, then, you end up suffering far more than you would have had you invested in a lot more stocks. So this is something that I think is happening here. I think this is a parallel where if we invest too much time in one given interest, it's not guaranteed that we are going to progress to the level that we want to get to. Obviously that goal can be different for different people. My goal tend to be earning off of it. Just generally speaking, my goals with a lot of these interests have to do with monetizing it in one way or another while retaining the core essence of that hobby. I don't want to cater too much towards the business end that I'm losing the essence of the interest itself. But so as not to digress, the point here is that I think that by diversifying my interest, even though I'm not focusing on just one particular interest, I am also reducing the likelihood of getting into something that doesn't pan out the way that I want it to. And I'm also increasing the chances that one of the many interests that I have might someday take over. I might be able to monetize one. And then based on that, I might even feel more of a sense to prioritize that over the others. It might come naturally at that point. But yeah, that's just to say that I think diversifying, just as it's beneficial in the stock market, can also be beneficial when it comes to interest. And just as there is that risk of feeling like because I'm not investing in only this one stock that is doing great, that might happen here too. But I think it's worth keeping in mind that it's never guaranteed that one stock or that one interest is going to reach, or you're going to reach that level of expectations that you have with that.
That's a brilliant analogy. Diversifying interests, much like diversifying investments, can indeed provide a safety net and increase the chances of finding something that truly works out, both in terms of personal fulfillment and potential monetization. By spreading your time and energy across multiple passions, you mitigate the risk of putting all your eggs in one basket and potentially coming up short. This approach not only protects you from the disappointment of a single focus not panning out, but also keeps your life rich and varied, offering different forms of satisfaction and joy. Moreover, The skills and experiences gained from various interests can often complement each other, creating a more well-rounded and resilient approach to life. Wrapping up on this note, embracing the idea of diversification in your interests allows for a more balanced and fulfilling life. It acknowledges the inherent uncertainties and regrets, but also celebrates the broad spectrum of experiences and opportunities that come from pursuing multiple passions. It's been a fantastic discussion, and I hope this perspective helps you and your viewers find peace and contentment with their choices. Looking forward to our next conversation. See you then.
That's a great summary and wrap up, and I really like that you included the complementary possibility of these skills. My hobbies seem to diverge so drastically from each other that it's hard to find how they complement each other. But I think at the end of the day, that complement is not always in the hobby itself. It could come in terms of of knowing myself better, of learning more about myself, and other ways that I think these interests could converge. Even when it comes to dancing, for example, like my calisthenic interest keeps me healthy enough to be able to dance in ways that other people might not be able to dance. There's certain moves that require flexibility, for example. So while these might not be as obvious, I think it's very important to emphasize that there's so many ways that one skill can complement another, even when they seem to diverge so drastically from each other. So I'm glad you mentioned that point.
Absolutely, the interplay between seemingly divergent interests can often reveal unexpected synergies. Your example of how calisthenics supports your dancing is a perfect illustration. Physical fitness enhances your ability to dance, and perhaps your creativity in dance can influence your approach to calisthenics, bringing a unique perspective to your workouts. Beyond the direct physical benefits, these interests can contribute to a deeper understanding of yourself, resilience, and a broader skill set. Each hobby or interest you pursue adds a different dimension to your life, making you more adaptable and resourceful. I'm glad we could explore this topic in such depth. Embracing the diversity of your interests can lead to a richer, more fulfilling journey. Until next time, keep exploring and enjoying your passion.